Nice. So let's get started again. In the last hour, we took a look at how to add Swagger, Open API Specification to our API. And we have verified that the documentation is generated correctly. We have also taken a look and understood that Swagger does not only generate HTML, it also generates JSON, which is a machine-readable version of our specification. And this thing is used as the input for source generators. This is what you should have understood so far. Now, I would like to show you how to more closely and in more details document such API endpoints. The important thing is that after each of these map XXX functions, something like this, map get, map post, map delete, map put, and so on, you can continue here with additional methods. You can, for instance, say with name, and then you specify a name. This is the ping endpoint, for instance. If you do something like this and press F5 again, then, if we are lucky, and if I didn't screw up, our Swagger will look a little bit differently. You take a look at the ping. Oh, sorry, I wanted to show you the Swagger file here, the JSON file. Let's go down. And here you see that it now generated a so-called operation ID. Now, the operation ID is something special. The operation ID is the internal identifier of the operation. And this is especially important when you want to refer to a specific operation. So this is a kind of technical name for the endpoint. It's not visible to the end user, but it's a technical name. This is the name, the ID. Now, how can we add some nice description for end users? This is done with summary. We can say this is a demo endpoint returning POM. Something like this. Let's give it a try. Let's run it. This is with summary. Let's take a look at the Swagger UI. And if we take a look at this one, where did I add it? I added it at the ping endpoint. Oh, it's not there yet. Where is it? Should be visible. Let me check. Okay, I found the problem. The with description that I told you, for whatever reason, there seems to be some issue with Swagger here. I just found a GitHub issue that this does not work. So let's forget about that one. Please ignore that. It was wrong. I told you something wrong and I apologize for that. Instead, we use the with Open API method. I would have used this API method a little bit later for something else, but we can use it for this thing too. With Open API, that will give us another options parameter, and this options parameter can be used with the description to specify any description that you like for this specific endpoint. So here you can add some additional documentation for the end user. Please try that. Please add the description, just as you see it here, and give me feedback whether this now works. I'm sorry with this with description or with summary, but now we have a working version. Does it work? I see thumbs up. Very good. Please also note that I now used Markdown. Are you familiar with Markdown? I think we had a lightning talk about Markdown, right? Now, this one in Markdown means write the text in italic. And guess what? Swagger will respond to that and show us the text in italic. So you can add links, for instance. You can use bold fonts and things like that. So this is really a nice end-user documentation of the API endpoint. Let me take this opportunity to give you a tip. Whenever you want to add some documentation stuff inside of C#, In the latest version of C#, there is a really nice feature for that. Let me show you how that looks like. I'm not sure if I ever did that in this course, in this class, but this is super useful. See, I write 3 quotes, and I go into the next line, and I close the string again with 3 quotes. What does these 3 quotes do? They allow you to add multi-lines of code, see? And by using these 3 quotes, C# will, let me show you what C# will do. C# will ignore the first carriage return here, so the first character of the description is the T. And it will also exclude and ignore the white spaces here on the left-hand side. So you can really nicely indent your strings without screwing up your description. Understand what I mean? That is the magic of these 3 quotes here. Well, to be perfectly correct, it doesn't matter how many quotes you use. Yes, you can do something like this and something like this. This is valid C#. It doesn't make sense, but it is valid C#. You can do that. As long as it starts and ends with the same number of double quotes, everything is okay. Did you know the C# feature? It's brand new. Yeah?
No, but Java also has this feature.
Okay, I didn't know that. But yeah, now I learned something about Java. Good. So if I run this, let's rerun that, then hopefully the description will now contain multi-line text. Let's check. Here. Let's take a look. And you see, it now contains multi-line text. And if we take a look at the JSON file, where is the description? Here is the description. You see, the system didn't screw up what you entered. There is no additional white spaces here. It's perfectly fine. Okay? Nice. So now you learned how to add a description field for your API. In practice, this is really relevant because without documentation, nobody can use your APIs. Well, we can now clean up again, so we don't need this blah, blah, blah here. It's perfectly fine to have only this line. Next step. Imagine that we build an endpoint that returns a person. We have the person down here. So what we can do is we can say app.mapGet, I don't know, something like people 42, and it should return a new person 2 and 42, something like this. Doesn't matter. Please use your imagination. In real world, you will not return just the person foo. You will go to the database and look up the person using its ID, and then you construct this ETO as we discussed it 2 weeks ago. But that's not our topic today. We simply want to have an API that simulates returning a person. Let's take a look at the Open API specification for this thing. Let's take a look at the get people thing here. People 42. It has no parameters. That is correct. It has 200 success. That is correct. And it also recognized that we are returning a person with name and age. Isn't that thing awesome? It can figure out a lot of things just by taking a look at the return statement. Are you blown away by so much intelligence? Well, you shouldn't, because this is just a very simple demo case. Now let me show you something else. Imagine that your code becomes a little bit more complicated, okay? Something like if, check if person exists. I'm just simulating this by saying true. So here, please imagine that we are going to the database and ask the database whether the person exists. Use your imagination here, okay? Let's assume the person exists. If it does, we say return results dot okay, and we specify the new person. And in all other cases, we say return results not found. Make sense? Yeah, we have a warning here because this always results in true. Whatever. Please, again, use your imagination. In real world, we would have code here. Let's run it again, and let's check Swagger. Let's check the implication of our changed code to the Swagger file. Now, if we take a look at the documentation now, here, we lost a lot of context. Swagger now tells us just this thing returns 200. But this is wrong. It might return 200. But it can also return not found. Understand what I mean? And this is the end of the intelligence of Swashbuckler and Swagger. It cannot read the code for us. It is not capable to dive into our C# code and understand that sometimes we return 200, and if we return 200, we return a person, and sometimes we return not found, and if we return not found, the payload will be empty. That cannot be identified automatically. For that, we again have to annotate our API. And for that, we have the produces endpoint here. We can say it produces a person when it returns status codes dot OK. Here we are telling the system, hey, my API produces a person when it returns the status code 200. But it might also produce a status code not found. See? And with that, we can document the possible status codes that our API generates. So, let's run it again, and let's check what's going on. Let's take a look here. Scroll down. Here we are. Woohoo! Success! Take a look. 200 returns a person. 404, not found, is also a possible outcome. Does anybody need more time to try it? Any problems? Okay. So you have seen that in real world, every single API will very likely contain a name, a description, and a lot of produces statements. So in some cases, the documentation is longer than the implementation. That's typically in real world. In real world, you write 3 lines of code, and then you write 15 lines of tests, and 50 lines of documentation, something like this. This is the reason why even in very professional developers typically only produce a handful, maybe 2 handful lines of code per day. A lot of developers, they only produce a really low number of lines of code per day. That does not mean that they are lazy. It just means that for every single line of code, they need to spend a lot of time in meetings. They need to spend a lot of time thinking about the code. They need a lot of time documenting what they did, just like we did it here. And they need a lot of time writing unit tests, integration tests, and end-to-end tests for the code. There is a lot of discussion going on nowadays whether the efficiency of a software developer can be measured by taking a look at the number of lines of code that this developer produces. Have you followed the discussions on Twitter with Elon Musk and Him firing people because they write too few lines of code? I don't agree with Elon Musk. I think he's a very interesting engineer, but in that point, I don't agree with him. Number of lines of code is not a good metric to compare developers. Because sometimes they spend a lot of time thinking and documenting and testing. Good, but that is another story. So this is documentation. Now we can do a little bit of extra work. You do not need to write down what I'm doing now. You can. Maybe you note it down in your sample. But what I'm showing you now is a little bit of extra. A little bit of extra. It will not be relevant for the exam. In the exam, I expect you to be able to use that to add a description. I expect you to know that there is something like a produces. What I'm going to show you now goes beyond what you are going to need in the exam. Okay? But still, it is useful. Let's add this with Open API to our latest API endpoint here. And let's explore what else we can do here. We have already seen return. We have already seen that we can here specify a description. See, this is the description. O.description returns a person by ID. That is fine. That is really okay. But now we can also, and GitHub Copilot is immediately giving me a hint what I can do here. We can also specify that we want to have a certain description for specific response codes. And GitHub Copilot did not do a good job in generating this code correctly. It's wrong what GitHub Copilot just generated. The correct code would be a typecast to int with a toString here. And now we can say success case, we found a person with the given ID. And we can add exactly the same, but this time we say in the case of not found, we can put a description here where we say no person found with the given ID. Instead of telling you in theory what these two lines do, I'm going to show it to you. So let's run this code. And let's take a look at the Swagger file here. And if we take a look here, what we now have is a nice little documentation where we can give the user extra context. When are we going to return 200? When are we going to return 404? That's really useful if you use an API like that. We are not just telling the end user what we are going to use for our status codes, but we also add additional descriptive information when we are going to use these codes. Okay, granted, this is not the most beautiful code on earth. It might be more beautiful, maybe it will be more beautiful in the future, but still, it works. It's okay. Can you follow along?
Yes.
Does it make sense? Yes? Do you need extra time to finish your samples? Awesome. I love that. So now we have learned how the produces section document the schema and status codes, and we can even add a description depending on the status code here. I like that. Let's do another example. Let's add another endpoint, app.mapget people, And in this case, we are going to add a query string parameter. Something like string sorted by, and let's say ordered by. It's the name of the property which should be used for ordering. I'm not going to implement this here. I'm just saying throw new not implemented exception, which will be okay, so we can compile the code. Of course it doesn't work, it doesn't do anything useful. Again, use your imagination. In this case, we would go to the database, read the person records from the database, order them accordingly, for instance, by using a SQL order by clause, and return the people. So let's take a look at the generated Swagger. I will run this, press F5, go here, refresh it. You see, now we have a get people, and see, this is exactly what we want. We can even, when we click on try it out, specify the value of this order by, I don't know, order by first name, for instance, something like this. We can specify the parameter here, so we can immediately execute the API and run it. Of course, in our case, if I run it, something bad will happen because it crashes. Yeah, we have a throw new not implemented exception. So if I take a look here, it crashes. See? Clear. If I continue to run it, I will get some internal server error. See? Because I didn't implement it. But I think you got the point, right? ASP.NET Core Minimal API is really smart when it comes to deriving the Swagger specification in JSON and also displaying it in the UI. By just specifying this thing here, it automatically recognizes that this is a query string parameter. It documents it accordingly, so everything looks really fine. The question is, how can we add some descriptive information to this order by thing here? This is again where we use this dot with Open API configuration function. We can, for instance, say o.parameters 0. That would be the first parameter, this one, because we only have one. And then we can say description. And here, okay, GitHub Copilot is immediately recognizing what I want to do, the field to order by, and say return O. This allows us to add a descriptive, it allows us to add descriptive information to parameters. If we run it again, let's take a look if that works. Refresh the Swagger file, go to people, here, see? And now we have a parameter, it's in the query, the type is correct, and we got the description. Of course, all this information is also included in our JSON file. Just so you see it, see, here we have the parameters, field to order by, that's exactly what we want to have. Oh, that's, yeah, I know what you mean. You mean here? Yes. It's added automatically. If I don't use anything else, it's added automatically. So yeah, for the sake of completeness, let's also add the slash here. It's the forward slash, not the backslash, strictly speaking, but yeah, you are absolutely right. Yeah, let's put it there. Good point, good point. Okay. We have one last thing to do today, and that's again a little bit of extra information. And I don't require you to know that and do that in the exam. But still, I would like to show it to you so that you get a bigger picture, a clearer picture of how documentation of such things work in C#. Please go to the csproj file, the csproj file here, and add one additional setting in this property group here. It's called generate documentation file true. This is the setting that I want to have. I will zoom in so you can read it a little bit better. Generate documentation file true. Again, that is extra information. I will not ask you that in the exam. Now, what's going to happen if we say generate documentation file true? In order to show you that, we need to add a little bit of documentation to our code. Okay, we need to add a little bit of documentation. For instance, here in the person, let's put it here, we use such a documentation. Have you ever seen this kind of documentation in a C# code? This / XML stuff? This is the standard feature of writing documentation inside of C# code. Represents a person, blah, blah, blah. And then we say /summary. We can even add documentation to the generated properties. We can, for instance, say public string name get init equals to name. I just duplicate the specification here in order to be able to document a little bit here. Summary, the name of the person. That looks good. What you see here is so-called C# XML inline documentation. It allows you to document your code directly in the code. And that's really something that is done very frequently. In fact, in practice, when you write code in your internships, for instance, your employer will require, they will assume that you are going to write documentation like that. And that is very, very common also in other programming languages. You document TypeScript code like that. You document Rust code like that. You document Go code like that. Not with XML, don't get me wrong, but inside of the code with comments. Okay? Different languages have different approaches. In JavaScript, it's called JSDoc. In Rust, it's very sophisticated what you can do there. And in C#, it's XML. It is like it is. If you don't like it, I'm very sorry. You don't need to like it, you just need to use it. Yeah. Now, with this setting here, generate documentation file, something very interesting is going to happen. Let me show you what's going to happen. I'm going here in the terminal, here, and in the terminal I'm going to say .NET build. So I'm going to build the whole thing. You can also press F5 if you want, but I'm just building it. And if we take here a look in the bin folder, see that one? Then suddenly there is a new file here in town. It's called Hello Swagger XML. See that one? And if we click on this XML file, you will see that this XML file now contains the extracted documentation from our source code. It says, hey, whoever's interested, a person has this summary. See? The name of the person has this summary. Now, wouldn't it be super, super nice if Swagger could pick up this file and display it when documenting the API? So I just need to document my classes and properties and methods, and Swagger will pick up this documentation automatically and provide it through the API endpoint. And this is exactly what's possible. This is really, really useful. And you should definitely do that in a real-world API if you use ASP.NET Core. And this is exactly what I would like to show you. So go into the program here. And in the program, at the very beginning, where we have this add swagger gen stuff, there is another method which says options.include XML comments, and it wants to have the name of the XML file. And in this case, we simply say, how was it called? I just forgot it. Hello Swagger XML. Yeah, something like this. Let's try it and let's see what's going to happen. File not found. See? It can't find the file. Why didn't it find the file? Because of a folder problem. We are not in the correct folder. That was by design. I knew that this would happen. So let's try to specify the full path. It depends on whether you are on Linux or Windows. If on Windows you can say cd to display the current directory. On Linux you say pvd. Sorry, it says print working directory. Let's take that one here, and then we have /bin/debug /net70, and then specify the XML file. Don't worry, we will make that more beautiful in a second. But for now, let's specify the absolute path here. Got it? Let's run it again, and let's see whether it works now. Okay, here we are. Refresh it, and if I scroll down and open person, oh my god, see? Represents a person, blah, blah, blah. And if I take a look at the name of the person. It may be strange to you why I'm getting so excited about something rather simple, but hey, I don't like to write documentation, and I hate writing documentation twice. So it's very important for me to just write the documentation once, and it should be spread all over my portals automatically. And this is exactly what Swagger does. Can you understand the motivation? Why you do something like this? I know documentation is boring, but in practice it's important. So how can we fix this ugly thing here? Well, I will show you the code, how you can do it, but I, again, do not expect you to remember that. What you can essentially do is you can ask the assembly namespace, assembly. Sorry, it's not a namespace, it's a class, to say get executing assembly, something like this, and then this can say get location. This var location of executable is the location of the executable file. So it will essentially return us the full path to our executable. Then we can extract the file name without the extension from the executable. Or exec file name without extension, path get file name without extension, something like this. See? So on Windows, it would return the name of the executable, blah, 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 .exe, but without the .exe. Just the name. Got it? Now we can also extract the file path, the exec file path, by saying path.getDirectoryName. That will give us the folder where the execute is. And then we can combine these things. GitHub Copilot automatically recognized what I want to do. So I'm path combining these two things, take the file path, and then take the executable file name and append .xml. Then I can use this XML file path. And with these few lines of code, I'm adding the name of the XML file in a more generic fashion. I don't need to hard code the URL of my XML file. Let's give it a try. Let's see if I screwed up. No, I didn't screw up. It still works. See? So again, I know that this is boring stuff, looking up the file name and directory and so on. But at the end of the day, if you want to have something like this, you now have a template and you can copy it from here. So let me be very clear about what you have to know in the exam. You absolutely have to know how to add Open API specification to your ASP.NET Core app. So this line of code, this line of code, this line of code, this line of code. Absolute minimum requirement. You have to know that. In order to be able to do that, you have to remember that you have to add 2 NuGet packages. You are allowed to use this sample as a template during the exam. So you do not need to learn that by heart. You can simply copy it, or if you want, ask ChatGPT. It will also give you a reasonable answer. You have to know how to add things like metadata, like name, like a description, and these produces stuff. Everything else, adding additional descriptions, adding the XML documentation, as you can see it here, that's just extra. If you are capable of doing it, and you manage to do that in the exam, that's a very good thing. If you can't do it, or you don't remember it, or you simply don't do it because I don't explicitly ask you to, that's also fine. That is what I wanted to show you today. Now you have learned what Swagger and Open API specification is. That is not just a technology which is relevant for C#. That technology is relevant in every programming language with which you build a web API. And this technology is used by all the big ones. If Google writes a web API, they use this standard. If Microsoft writes a web API, they use this standard. If you take a look at Kubernetes, the Kubernetes API is documented with this standard. Got it? So it's very relevant information. Do you have any final questions? Are we good? Tomorrow we are going to practice that. Tomorrow I will give you an example. So I will ask you to implement another API. And the example will focus on adding Open API specification. And with that, we are done for today. See you tomorrow.